April 16th, 2014. The MV Sewol, a 6,825-ton ferry carrying 476 people, begins to list while crossing the Mongol Channel off South Korea's southwest coast. 325 of the passengers are second-year students from Danwon High School on a field trip to Jeju Island. As the ship tilts, a crew announcement tells passengers to stay where they are and not move, and the students obey, trusting the adults in charge. Within 2 hours, the ferry is upside down in the water. 304 people are dead, 250 of them children. The captain and senior crew are among the first to be rescued, while passengers are still trapped inside. The South Korean government calls it an accident, but every failure that killed those children was a decision made for profit, ignored by regulators and covered up by officials. After Chonghaejin Marine acquired the MV Sewol in 2012, the company ordered sweeping modifications. 2 new passenger decks were added to the stern, expanding the number of cabins to 239 and raising total capacity to nearly 1,000 people. The ferry's gross tonnage grew by 239 tons, but the changes went deeper than numbers on a manifest. Each added cabin lifted the ship's center of gravity higher above the waterline. The hull, once designed to carry heavy cargo low and stable, now bore the weight of extra steel and crowded passenger spaces stacked above its original limits. Maritime engineers would later calculate that these modifications erased the vessel's safety margin. The Sewol's ability to right itself in rough seas was critically weakened. Stability tests performed after remodeling showed a margin near zero, but these warnings were buried in paperwork. The Korean Register of Shipping, paid by the very company it regulated, certified the ship as seaworthy. For Chonghaejin executives, each new cabin meant more tickets sold and higher profits. The cost was invisible, a ship that could tip and capsize from a single sharp turn. What began as a business decision to squeeze more revenue from an aging ferry became the first break in a chain of safety that would never be repaired. Inspectors from the Korean Register of Shipping arrived with checklists and stopwatches, not to challenge the changes made to the Sewol, but to formalize them. Their job was to approve ships for sea, yet their pay came from the companies they were meant to scrutinize. On January 24, 2014, the official inclining test measured the ship's stability after its transformation. The numbers revealed a vessel dangerously top-heavy, with a safety margin so thin it could vanish in a single sharp turn. The language in the report softened the risk. It described the ship as less stable and within tolerance, and the certificate was issued anyway. The fee-for-service structure meant that failing a ship could mean losing a client. For Chonghaejin Marine, a rubber stamp from the register turned a compromised ferry into a legal passenger vessel. Inspectors did not demand new calculations or enforce stricter limits. They accepted the paperwork, signed their names, and moved on. In this system, oversight was not a barrier, but a transaction. The result was a ship certified as seaworthy by the very people who depended on its continued operation for their own income. Each approval made the routine overloading that followed feel not just possible, but normal. Forensic teams turned to the ship's own data to settle the question of what brought the Sewol down. Automatic identification system logs traced the ferry's path through the Mongol Channel, recording a sharp turn at 8:48 a.m. In that instant, there were no signs of a collision, no sudden drop in speed, no spike in deceleration, nothing to suggest an external blow. The ship's accelerometers, designed to measure force and motion, showed only the gradual rise in G-forces as the vessel began to list. Dashcam footage from vehicles on board captured the moment the tilt began, a slow, sickening angle, not the jolt of an impact. Investigators compared these readings to what would be expected in a collision or an underwater obstacle. The numbers did not match. There was no evidence of a shockwave, no abrupt change in velocity, no hull breach at the waterline. Every sensor pointed to the same conclusion: the disaster began from within. As the ship leaned, unsecured cargo shifted, and the top-heavy hull could not recover. The forensic record closed the door on theories of sabotage or accident. The cause was built into the ship itself, engineered by choices made long before that morning. Instability, not an outside force, sealed the fate of everyone on board. At Incheon, the Sewol's cargo planners signed off on a manifest listing just over 1,000 tons. The real weight loaded that night was more than 3 times higher, 3,608 tons of vehicles, steel beams and containers stacked and lashed with rope instead of chains. Ballast tanks meant to keep the ship stable were left half empty. Only 1,042 tons of water remained, less than a third of what engineers had recommended after the ferry's modifications. Each shortcut was a calculation. More cargo meant more profit, and ballast took up space that could be sold. The records show this was routine, not an accident. As the Sewol entered the Minegol Channel, the ship's third mate guided it through the current. At 8:48 in the morning, a sharp starboard turn sent the overloaded decks into motion. The cargo shifted. The top-heavy hull, already stripped of its margin for error, began to list. The numbers tell the rest. A center of gravity raised by illegal construction, a load more than triple the legal maximum, and a ballast deficit that erased any hope of recovery. In that moment, physics enforced the reality that paperwork and profit had denied. The ship would not right itself. The disaster had already begun. At 8:55 a.m., a voice crackled through the Sewol speakers and said, "Stay where you are." The order did not come from the captain, but from a junior crew member standing in for absent authority. Passengers, most of them teenagers in bright life jackets, sat quietly in their cabins and corridors. Some began recording short videos on their phones, their voices calm, waiting for the next announcement. Over the next 40 minutes, as the list steepened and water climbed the lower decks, the command did not change. Do not move. On the bridge, confusion reigned. The captain, Lee Jun-suk, was not at the helm when the crisis began. The third mate, 25 years old and only recently qualified, was left to manage the unfolding disaster. Radio traffic showed the crew focused on contacting shore authorities, not the passengers below. No evacuation order was given. Instead, the announcements repeated, "Stay inside. Do not move. Await instructions." Obedience became a trap. The corridors filled with water, exits were blocked by the steep angle of the hull. The captain and senior crew made their way to the deck and left the ship before any evacuation was broadcast. Inside, students waited for orders that never came. Their trust in authority was absolute. It cost them their lives. The Coast Guard arrived on scene at 8:58 a.m. Their patrol boats circled the listing ferry, radios crackling with reports of passengers trapped below deck. On shore, parents gathered around televisions and phones, searching for news. Official bulletins began to stream in. Rescue operations were underway. Most passengers safe, the bulletins said. The numbers climbed with each update, but the truth was that almost no one was being pulled from the hull. Civilian divers, local fishermen and volunteers stood ready on their boats, pleading to enter the water. The Coast Guard refused, citing protocol and safety. Divers waited for hours as the ship's windows slipped beneath the surface. Inside, students in life jackets filmed short videos on their phones, their voices steady, still waiting for the order to evacuate. Commanders on the Coast Guard vessels focused on rescuing crew and those already on deck. No one entered the submerged corridors. The announcements from shore grew more confident. One bulletin claimed before noon that all had been rescued. In reality, most of the 304 victims remained inside, their faith in rescue unbroken until the water silenced every phone. The only thing moving outside the ship was the tide. On land, parents clutched lists of survivors, crossing off names, waiting for a rescue that had already been abandoned. Today, evacuation drills still end with the words, "Trust instructions. Await rescue." In a world where obedience cost 250 teenagers their lives, that trust remains the most fragile casualty. Safety systems exist on paper, but accountability is always a choice. Sometimes, the most dangerous order is the one you obey.